Next, going to be reading Ecofascism and Indian Nationalism by Sam Moore and Alex Roberts in The Ecologist. This article from 7th February 2022. Climate breakdown represents an opportunity for eco-fascists around the world. The rise of nationalism in India shows how this is playing out today. Since we've known about climate change, there have been those who have urged us to ignore the science. Pride of place in this pantheon of shame must go to the oil companies who backed denialism for decades. They found willing accomplices in both right-wing and far-right political actors. And this is an extract from the book The Rise of Ecofascism. However, just as many oil companies have sought to rebrand themselves as energy companies more widely, with ever-declining interests in oil specifically, so too have some of the far-right begun to shift their positions away from out-and-out denialism. Far-right parties are less concerned with matters of branding than are oil companies, and this shift has been far from universal. Nevertheless, denialism is no longer the only major force on the far right. Some have opted for various degrees of acceptance. Irrigates. Like denialism, this acceptance is not one single thing. It can go in stages. The first stage of acceptance acknowledges something is wrong in the relation of humans to nature, but this acceptance is still almost entirely indeterminate. The second lays the blame with individualized consumption, often conspicuously commodified in the shape of consumer goods. The third stage entails a view of wider capitalist production that understands consumption not as an individual greed, but as a systemic effect of capitalism's demand for growth. Different far-right actors have adopted differing levels of acceptance. Even amongst the acceptors, proposals for action, perspectives on the specific social and historical process involved, and even the central mechanics, increasing levels of atmospheric carbon being the most basic, of climate change, are sometimes at odds with other environmentalists. Few adequately address the problem of global climate change, perhaps because little of their politics addresses that scale at all. In our new book, The Rise of Ecofascism, we discuss the climate politics of the Front National in France, Fidesz in Hungary, and Rodrigo Duterte in the Philippines as variants of these climate acceptors. Here, we look at one particularly important and complex group, the Indian far right, led by Narendra Modi, Indian Prime Minister since 2014. Along the Indus River lie the territorial claims of three nuclear powers: China through Tibet, India through Kashmir, and Pakistan. The river is at once one of the most important in the world, particularly for Pakistan, whose breadbasket region it irrigates, and runs through one of the most heavily contested territories in the world. Important components of Hindu nationalist politics are intimately tied up with control of the river and the wider Kashmir region. Ideological. A series of hydroelectric dams constructed on the Indus by India have been contested by Pakistan, who claim it would allow India to shut off the flow of the river Pakistan relies on to grow crops, a potentially devastating geopolitical weapon. It is not yet clear how exactly climate change will change its flow, but undoubtedly its variability will increase. This could lead to dangerous volatility in the region. You'll see similar concerns around the development of hydroelectric dams across many major rivers across the globe. Another one of particular note will be the Nile, where Ethiopia has developed a system of large dams in its highlands where some of the sources to the Nile River come from, and that's already causing problems with both Sudan and Egypt, who very much rely on the flow of the Nile to provide food and stability to their countries. You can also see it in the case of the Tigris and Euphrates. I'm pretty sure it's those two. Yeah, the Tigris and Euphrates, where, as you can see on the map here, their origins come from the highlands in eastern Turkey, and Turkey has again developed hydroelectric power dams along their sources, and this has caused concern and contention with both Syria as well as Iraq. And these hydroelectric dams along the Tigris and Euphrates have been used as both targets and weapons in some of the conflicts within the region previously, such as the case with some of the dams within Iraq's territory, which were targeted and blown up to cause a mass rapid flooding, to destroy urban areas and infrastructure further downriver from the hydroelectric dams. So, into this complex situation steps Modi. Modi's ruling, Bharatiya Janata Party, BJP, has positioned itself to defend the interests of Hindus at the expense of minorities. Modi's reputation was cemented by the pogrom against Muslims in Gujarat in 2002, where the official count documents 790 Muslims and 254 Hindus died. The real numbers are probably much higher. Some have claimed that Modi initiated, encouraged and condoned it. The pogrom in Gujarat was followed by violence against minorities in Orissa in 2007 and 2008, and in Muzaffarnagar in 2013. As you very much point out there, Boy Meets Mini, it is very prominent within a lot of Hindutva that whilst there is this espousal of a Hindu nationalism and a Hindu supremacy, part of that it is the reinforcement and a sort of reification of the caste systems within some of the strains and interpretations of Hinduism. And so whilst it is for the interests of Hindus, that is very much that it's the interest that you point out of the upper caste Hindus, and that the lower castes should, in the opinion of those who follow the caste system, keep to their rightful place in the social hierarchy. And even then, we do have specific cases through a lot of the actions of Modi's government, both from the state level to the federal level, where he has enacted various policies which have been very much detrimental and also targeted against the rights, liberties, whatever it is, within the legal framework of the lower castes. So, what is the social function of these acts of violence? Anti-caste leader Dr. B.R. Ambedkar wrote in 1936 that a caste has no feeling that it is affiliated to other castes except when there is a Hindu-Muslim riot. Class conflict and caste conflict in India are suppressed through the unification of disparate groups and anti-Muslim violence. On the note of Hindutva taking inspiration from European fascist movements, it's very much similar case to what you see of fascists, where the idea of the nation, the folk, supersedes any sort of class antagonisms or any other forms of discrimination or bigotry that may occur within the folk. Though, of course, then there's also the notion that many of the bigotries, such as, anti-queerness, anti-disability, tend to actually be incorporated in, depending on which fascism it is, different stages along the path, but at various points they become markers to signal someone as not being part of the nation, the folk. So, the second leader of the Rashtriya Swayam Sevak Sangh, the RSS, a large Hindu nationalist organisation in India with close ties to the BJP, MS Golwalkar, who remains a major ideological touchstone for the group, argued that there were three enemies that imperil the Hindu nation: Muslims, Christians and communists. Violence. These enemies are alike in one respect. They threaten to disrupt the supposedly natural unity and harmony of the Hindu race and Hindu civilization, which stretches back to time immemorial. In 1939, he suggested that Nazi Germany was a good model for Hindu nationalists to follow. Some of the places where the RSS's vigilante moral policing have been most prominent, such as cow defenders who attack Muslims accused of eating or slaughtering cows, which is prohibited in Hinduism, concern the human relationship to a spiritualized nature. Indeed, the growing vigilante militancy of the RSS, combined with its mobilization around stark religious and ethnic divisions, makes the situation in India arguably the closest in form to classical fascism of all countries of the contemporary period. If the RSS and BJP are committed to the construction of a Hindu state, perhaps we should see Modi's environmental politics as intertwined with this project. Modi's report into Gujarat's response to climate change, published when he was Chief Minister, opens with a discussion of the Rig Veda, the oldest of the canonical Hindu texts. Modi points out that the Rig Veda emphasized the importance of Panchtattvas, 5 elements: earth, air, water, solar energy and sky. He goes on, any disproportionate use of these energies will cause pollution and will promote selfishness, instincts of violence, jealousy, inimical to human development. On that note, yes, it's to anyone who's catching the VOD with it, once again, it's an apology for any of my mispronunciations to this stuff. When talking of any of these groups in India, I tend to stick to the initialisms for them. As Boy Meets Mini points out, I don't know Hindi, don't know Urdu, don't know, any of the languages from South Asia. So yes, I do struggle with a lot of the combinations of letters you find. One of them I'm very cognizant of in the aspiration formed by having H at various points within a word. I know that's something I am currently not able to do, and so that is, one of the prominent ones you'll see me messing up a lot. Okay, so mining. Elsewhere, Modi has called for special attention to yoga amidst discussions about climate change. Explaining climate change as a spiritual problem is not unique to Modi, but he is undoubtedly the most significant person to do so. How to understand these remarks? Jyoti Puri has argued that they derive from established discourses of Hindu spiritualism that were produced in opposition to and as a remedy for Western materialism. In 2014, newly Prime Minister, he bordered on outright denial. Climate has not changed, we have changed, our habits have changed. If we change, it, that is nature, is already ready to change. Humans should not struggle with the environment, humans should love the environment, be it water, air, plants. Similarly, as late as 2019, his environment minister denied that devastating floods in the country were caused by climate change. Throughout Modi's premiership, environmental regulations have been scrapped. Some 99.82% of industrial projects proposed in forests have been approved, up from 80%. In the midst of COVID-19 pandemic, the government released plans to exempt coal mining, cement plants, chemical fertilizers, manufacturing of acids and pesticides, as well as those concerning national defense and security or other strategic considerations from public consultation. That was not where I thought that paragraph would go. I thought it would be about any COVID restrictions that India may have had and exempting those working within these industries from the sort of, potential lockdowns or stuff. I don't know, what India actually did in regards to COVID-19. That was what I was assuming this paragraph would go into. And so on that note, I was preparing a sort of counter where I can understand, say a chemical fertilizer industry where, why you may allow that to continue through any lockdowns you may enforce due to, how necessary synthetic fertilizers are for the current global crop production. But no, it seems that COVID-19 was used as a bit of an excuse, as many countries engaged with, for passing various sort of legislation which may not normally be passed. In this case, exempting these industries from public consultation onto their activities. So, yeah, not a great thing to do. Should always have this sort of public scrutiny. Of course, ideally we'd have it in the best impact in that it's, the whole worker ownership to the industries, but that's still got a bit of work to get there. Mitigation. pollution targets have been scrapped for power plants, and in the first half of 2016, 60 new power plants went online without clean air technology installed. The Modi government has also cracked down on environmental NGOs, in late 2014 blocking the flow of overseas funds to Greenpeace India because of quote-unquote anti-national activities, and in 2020 targeting Indian Fridays for future activists. It has pushed to further remove the protections put in place after the 1984 Bhopal disaster. I'd not heard of this, oh dear, in which thousands died and over 500,000 people were exposed to highly toxic chemicals. This should not be something I'm surprised of, it should be something I expect of it, but hearing it's something that they're actively, engaged in, it's like, oh, that is not good. That is not good. Again, my knowledge only comes to, having learnt about the disaster, but that is an absolutely horrendous event. If anybody doesn't know about it, the Bhopal disaster was a chemical factory where, surprise, surprise, the company cuts corners because save a bit of money here and there, make those big profits for whoever owns it, where it was one of the big ones as well. One of the big American chemical companies was the ultimate owner to it. One evening, basically, Union Carbide, that's it, those bastards. I say that as if they are particularly bastardly, when no, all the big chemical companies are bloody bastards. But yes, major disaster, chemical plant, released, and again, I couldn't tell you the exact chemical off the top of my head, but basically released a thing which was basically a heavier than air gas cloud, which swept out for kilometers upon kilometers from the factory, suffocated so many people. What did they say here? I was going to say thousands, but yeah, thousands died, 500,000 were exposed. Yeah. Suffocating people, then many others suffered various forms of chemical burns as well as internal, they'd be burns as well from the inhalation of the gas where it wasn't enough to suffocate them. Definitely a horrific thing that people do to remember the sort of bullshit companies get up to, because of course it's, not just the only one, it's as within many countries across the globe, as well as with, in particular, the various global south countries where a lot of manufacturing is outsourced to by the global north. So many corners are cut and so many lives are lost. This rapid development at the cost of environmental destruction is not unconnected to Modi's religious discourse. Highways to pilgrimage sites have been driven through ecologically sensitive sites. In cases without compensation or consultation, there have, nevertheless, been some moves to mitigate climate change. The measures outlined in Modi's report from Gujarat are substantial. In 2014, Modi quintupled India's target for solar energy production by 2022, and then in 2015, on the eve of the Paris Climate Summit, India indicated for the first time a willingness to commit to legally binding emissions targets. In 2015, Modi joined calls for a framework of climate justice. Even here, religious discourse is intertwined. The call came at a Hindu-Buddhist conference where Modi proposed that Hinduism and Buddhism, although not Islam, were united in their ecological sensitivity. In late 2020, India signalled its intention to intensify its mitigation efforts. And even here, something that people may find interesting to read into is, especially in sort of Hindutva narratives, you'll often find them roll Buddhism and then other religions such as Sikhism and Jainism to being just particular sects, for lack of a better term, within Hinduism. Reckless. However, at the COP26 summit, India was famously involved in watering down the language of the deal from the proposed phase out of coal to a mere phase down. Some have argued that this must be seen in the light of the history of underdevelopment in India. This is undoubtedly true, and much of our new book, The Rise of Ecofascism, is dedicated to exploring the management of the climate crisis in the long duration of colonialism. More generally, defenders of Modi have argued that rapid development is essential to help people escape the ravages of poverty. It is a potent argument, but environmental regulations largely defend those living in poverty, and the BJP have also shredded deliberative aspects of the state where they can be heard. Here, neoliberal marketisation and deregulation, as well as de-democratization of the state, go hand in hand with religiously inflected reactionary nature politics, which understands protesters as quote-unquote parasites. If Modi's concern were for the well-being of the poor or for social justice, then his policies could scarcely be less appropriate. Instead, the Modi government's reckless position on climate change mitigation will likely end up as a disaster for India's poor, just as they will be for the world at large. Refugees. What might we expect in the future? Given India's high risk of climate disruptions, the politics of adaptation there are just as important as mitigation. There's a worrying possibility that the tendency towards social unification around anti-Muslim violence and exclusion will intersect in the future with climate change disasters. It is in this context that the 2019 amendment to the citizenship law, which provided a pathway for refugees claiming religious persecution in Afghanistan, Pakistan and Bangladesh, but not from Muslims, becomes relevant. It might allow for future denials of the citizenship of Muslims who cannot prove their status, and make it difficult to access disaster aid. As Aranyo Arjun writes, should a Hindu nationalist government, which has shown a flagrant disregard for people's lives, be in charge of the state of West Bengal, which has a sizable impoverished Muslim population and shares a long border with the Muslim majority Bangladesh, at a time when up to 18 million people will potentially be made into refugees by rising sea levels alone, the possible results are almost too bleak to consider. And that's the end on that one. Oh, India's been running out of coal. Okay. I don't think I was aware of that matter. I was aware how at COP26, India and China were two big voices in getting, the language of the agreement changed from phasing out to phasing down, as both were still envisaging the use of coal power as a major driver to their economic engines.